Hey everyone, it's Sam, and today I'll be bringing you a video on a MoP Mage Guide actually, and it'll be my first video ever released, so I'm super excited. Really excited with MoP coming out. It's only going to be like a few days from now, and it was like the first expansion where I started getting pretty good at the game, so I'm just super pumped to actually play it again. It's been like, I don't even know, 10 or 12 years, and I just thought I would make a quick guide going over like all the basics with the gear, talents, glyphs, and all that good stuff. So if you guys are interested, yeah. Going into the gear side of things, it's pretty standard, I would say. It's all been pretty mathed out. Like, you know, we did this 10, 12 years ago, so not much has changed. But I figured I'd make a template just for the BG gear and the epic gear too. But I'll start off with the blue gear just because it's going to be the gear everyone's rocking for like the first month or two of the season, I would say. Probably like a month, I guess. In terms of like gemming and enchants and all that, I'll show you what I have right here. And I've also played a lot of beta, and I feel like I have a pretty decent grasp of like what's going on, and I haven't copied anyone else, so I'm not sure if what I'm doing is what everyone else is doing. So take it with a grain of salt. It may not be the best. It's what I believe to be the best, so could be completely wrong. Hope I'm not, for the sake of the video and for the sake of myself. But yeah, let's get into it, dude. We are rocking in the blue gear. We have our regims will be the 160 intellect on every single regim you can do. Pretty standard stuff. And going into the orange gems, I believe. Yeah, they're orange. I have 80 int and 160 haste to my orange gems, and then the blue ones are just 80 int, 80 PvP power. So like I said, it's pretty standard. With that being said, you do want to make sure you, in terms of your stat values themselves, you do want to make sure you are capped at 6% hit. I'm not exactly in this blue gear. I have some pieces missing. There's an add-on you can download. I believe it is called Reforge Lite. So you download this add-on and it configures everything for you, and it'll give you 6% hit right off the bat, right, nice and even. It'll be great. Best add-on you can get for this. You don't want to be too under, you don't want to be too over, because then you're kind of just, you know, if you're over, then you're just wasting stat value that you could have elsewhere. And if you're under, you can obviously like miss your spells, which is not ideal. So being at 6% on the dot, it's just chef's kiss. And outside of that, in terms of your stat values, you want to get as much haste as possible. In the first season, your stat values are kind of low as a caster. It's not the best it'll be. Melee is a little bit, I don't want to say it's advantaged, but I do feel like casters generally scale better than melee as the seasons progress throughout the expansion. So with that being said, you do want to slam as much haste as humanly possible. As you can see, I only have 10% right now in the blue gear, which is quite low. 11%, I guess, but it is quite low. And then you want to go for crit instead of mastery. So at the end of MoP and, you know, the later seasons, you know, 13, 14, 15, mastery begins to outweigh crit. But since our stat values are so low, our crit also is not guaranteed. And as a mage, you know, you have pretty high crit chance, but not being able to guarantee you crit in your shatter or your fingers of frost, it can be brutal, right? So you can pet nova somebody, you can ice lance them, and there's a chance it doesn't crit, which is a pretty tough feeling as a mage. So what you want to do is you want to prioritize your crit over your mastery. So the pieces that you can reforge those from mastery to crit. Pretty self-explanatory, I would say. And then as the seasons progress and as you get more and more gear, you get more and more stats, you will naturally start to gravitate away from crit and then start going into mastery, because then you'll be over capped on crit. If you were to get around, I want to say the stat value is like 22-24% crit, that's when you will start to have like a 90-95% chance to crit every single shatter, every single fingers of frost, which is obviously pretty high chance, which is great. And then I think automatically, like in season 13, 14, and 15, you just get that by default with the gear, and then that's when you just start slamming mastery for maximum damage. And then I will show you my enchants quickly. And going from the blue gear to the epic gear, it's the same in terms of my enchants and the way I gem, completely the same. Obviously, we just have higher stat values, and this is how my gear looks with full epic gear. And this will be like, once you cap for, you know, 3 or 4 weeks and you get all of your gear, this is what your gear should look like, in my opinion. And I'll just go over it quickly. Like I said, the gems are the exact same. Nothing has changed in terms of the gems or the enchants. And then speaking of enchants, I am currently on my shoulders, I have 200 int, 100 crit. I have tailoring enchant on my cloak, which I will get into sooner or later in the video. 80 all stats to my chest, 180 int to the bracers, haste to gloves, 285 int and crit to pants, and 175 haste to boots. So you do have the option to enchant your rings if you're an enchanter. I haven't opted into going into enchanting, but it can be viable. I'll speak on that later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. Pretty basic, you know, like I said, it's been all said and done years and years ago. Not much has changed. The major takeaways, I would say, in terms of gearing: 6% hit, you must have 6% hit, and then after that you slam as much haste as possible, and then you want to have around 19 to 23-24% crit is what I would do personally. And then the rest you can just slam into mastery. Moving on from that into the talent side of things, this is like a pretty basic template that you're probably going to run the majority of your games. You're gonna change a few things here and there, or you can choose to. You don't have to. And this is specifically for threes. This will be your template. Presence of Mind, obviously it's a very broken mechanic in Mists of Pandaria for Mage. Every minute and a half, you have the option of just sheeping a healer for free, right? 1 minute, 30 second CD, it's broken. Moving on from that, we actually have Temp Shield versus Flame Glow. And it's really cool to see, but like back in the day, everybody played Temp Shield. No one played Flame Glow. It wasn't a talent. Everyone thought it was terrible, this and that. It just, you know, it wasn't that great. Now, in this iteration of the expansion, a lot of top mages are opting to play Flame Glow in 3v3 Arena. And I thought that was interesting, right? Because it's, you know, all the best players back then, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, they all played Temp Shield. And I do see the debate. You know, we do have the receipts, we do have the details, we do have the recount, and Flame Glow healing is very high. It's super high. Every game you play it against any comp, it generally does do more healing than Temp Shield. Now, does that mean it's necessarily better? I believe, I would say no. And the reason why is because you don't just get healing from Temp Shield. There's another mechanic, or there's actually a few mechanics involved in it. It is a 15% damage reduction when you press it for 4 seconds, which, you know, that's pretty great. That, you know, you could count that as healing, but it doesn't show on the healing meters. But reducing all damage taken by 15% is not bad, you know? Who wouldn't want that? And then on top of that, you do heal 100% of the damage you take over 6 seconds, that's great, right? You take, if you were to go from 100% health all the way to 5% health, and then you pop your Temp Shield, you're gonna go back to 100% health over the course of 6 seconds, which is phenomenal if you're taking big spikes of damage. And then on top of that, it does count as a buff. So you could use it as a trash buff. You know, if you're getting purged a lot, you know, you want to protect your altar, you want to protect this and that. It does count as a trash buff, whereas Flame Glow, it's not a buff at all. It's just a passive. With that being said, Flame Glow does a lot of healing. It absorbs 3157 damage of each attack, up to maximum 30% of the attack. So the way this wording comes across as it's very good against lower damaging attacks. So it's not going to do an insane amount of healing if you get hit for like 80,000, for example, or like 60,000. But versus classes with dots and bleeds, you know, like think Warlocks, Ferals, maybe even Boomkin, Fire Mage maybe, it can add up. The healing can definitely add up. And I would say this is a pretty good talent to run versus the comp like LSD2, where you're taking a bunch of small hits over the course of a long game. I would probably play it here. I still hold the belief that Temp Shield against majority of other comps, maybe every other comp, is just a flat out better ability. Maybe I'm a little biased, maybe I'm a little old school, but I think Temp Shield still holds a lot of value. It's also not affected by dampening as well. So I don't know if Flame Glow is or isn't. So I can't speak on that, unfortunately, but I do know Temp Shield isn't. So having that in dampening is pretty nice. Moving on though, we're going to play Ring of Frost pretty much every single game. You can play Frostjaw if you're a Fire Mage, but this is a Frost Mage guide, so would never play it as Frost. Ice Ward isn't terrible. You can run it into Glyphs if you so choose. I probably wouldn't. Maybe if I was, you know, just losing every single game, maybe gotta try something different. Maybe I try it. I could see it getting okay value versus like a turbo. Maybe a KFC, like a Shaman KFC. Outside of that, I'd probably never run it. It's just Ring of Frost. It just holds a lot of value in this expansion, especially when a lot of the meta comes down to Resto Druids. You're gonna fight a Resto Druid a lot in MoP. Like in like all of your threes games, you're just gonna see a bunch of Resto Druid. So being able to Ring of Frost them when they shift to Deep Freeze is amazing, obviously. Moving on from that, we have Cold Snap. We're not playing anything but Cold Snap the entirety of the expansion. These two talents are pretty bad. Cold Snap is also only a 3-minute CD in MoP. Your Ice Block is 5, your Cold Snap is 3. So you have blocks pretty frequently, I would say. And it also heals you for 30% of your max health. Great talent. Next two, we're playing Living Bomb and Counter's Ward. We're not really ever playing these. This is a 3s guide. In RBGs, you could play Tempest. In 5s, you could play Tempest. But in 3s, you're playing Living Bomb and you're playing a Counter's Ward. Going back, actually, there was talent I accidentally skipped over. Blazing Speed. So this is a talent that you would only run pretty rarely, I would say. If you're playing a comp that's not, your objective isn't to get much CC, you're trying to just win with like raw throughput, raw pressure, you can play Blazing Speed. And what comes to mind when I think of this is Warrior Mage. When you play Warrior Mage Monk, you play Warrior Mage Druid, and you know, you're fighting a Resto Shaman team, it could be hard to land Sheeps. You might just say, hey, let's kill the Resto Shaman. It's a very viable strat, especially as a warrior comp. And what do shamans do? They run, right? So what do you want to do? You want to run at them. So you don't need Palm. You play Blazing Speed, and it's pretty phenomenal. Obviously, you can use it in a few different ways. You can use it to run at the shaman, you know, to try and close the gap and get damage off on him. Or if you're dying, you can use it to run away and retreat. So you definitely get some value out of it. Like I said, I think this is more of a pick if you're playing like Warrior Mage, like I said, and you're running into troubles trying to CC Resto Shaman teams, because you know, when you play with a warrior, it's not so easy to set up CC. You know, you don't have a rogue on your team. you don't have a Shadow Priest on your team, so you don't have like quite as good setup. So a lot of times you have to make up for that with damage or like trying to just kill the healer instead, which is completely fine under the right circumstances. So that's about the only time I would ever play it, but it does have value. I've killed a lot of shamans playing this talent before with a warrior on my team. But outside of that, you're going to play Palm for sure. Moving on to glyphs here. So it actually is quite interesting. You can play a few different glyphs depending on the circumstances, and I will go over those. But for like a standard template, I'll show you right here. So you're going to be running glyph armors, polymorph, and deep freeze pretty much every game. And they do change every so often depending on what you fight. Starting off with ice block. So when you fight double caster, you're going to always want to play this. It's just max value. And depending on the comp you can play, you can either drop ice block or you could drop polymorph. In very, very niche scenarios, you could also drop deep freeze, but probably like 1 out of 50 games you would do that. Usually I drop armors. If you're playing with something like a rogue, for example, where they don't really dot many targets, they don't bleed many targets, you could drop polymorph because it's not the end of the world, right? But if you're playing with like a shadow priest, a warlock, or a warrior where they're just like spreading like their dots and their deep wounds all the time, it's going to be kind of annoying. So I wouldn't drop polymorph under those circumstances. I would drop armors instead. But yeah, I would play this against double caster for the most part. Wouldn't really play it versus like a melee caster. And moving on from that, we would play water elemental. Actually isn't a glyph that many people played back in OG MoP, but in this iteration of MoP, especially versus like certain teams that certain cleaves rather, I should say, a popular strat these days is training the water elemental, because when your water elemental dies, man, it's tough. As a mage, everyone knows that feeling. You don't have pet nova, so you can't root them as frequently. You don't get your 2 fingers of frost, and not only that, water elemental does a lot of damage in MoP. It's probably your 4th or 5th highest damaging ability on your details, which is crazy for a pet, right? So having this thing die, it sucks. It's not a great feeling. So a lot of people play water elemental depending on, you know, if the cleave is training their pet or, you know, whatnot. So I wouldn't run it as like a default build, but if you're fighting like a KFC or a turbo, maybe even a kitty cleave, you know, jungle even, a double melee, just training your pet the entirety of the game and then trying to train you afterwards, this could be a pretty good option. And what we would drop here is we would have to, because if you're fighting a cleave, you can't drop armors. You just need it. The physical damage reduction of molten armor is a lot better than magical reduction from mage armor against double caster. So we always need armor's glyph against double melee no matter what. Absolutely do not drop this. If you're going to drop something for water elemental, like I said, it does depend on what comp you're playing. So if you're playing with like a shadow priest, you might have to drop deep freeze. If you're playing with the warlock, you might have to drop deep freeze. Otherwise, you're going to need to communicate and try and change your strategy a little bit and say, hey, like, I'm not playing polymorph glyph. Try not to dot this target, don't dot this target, and you're going to have to like play with your team and play around it, which is completely, that's fine as well. You can most certainly do that, but it will need to be communicated, like I said. So that's something you can do, because your pet dying, like I said, it's not ideal. Super not ideal. Moving on from that, I don't think there's too many other talents that you would really play in these scenarios in 3v3 arena. It starts getting kind of niche. You could play double blink versus a cleave that's training you relentlessly. You know, like I said, turbo, KFC, kitty cleave, jungle. I've played over 1,000 games on beta, and I personally haven't ran it yet. You could mess around with it if you really wanted to. Moving on to minor glyphs now. These are pretty much all cosmetic. They don't really do anything beneficial to you in your gameplay at all. With that being said, there are some minor tweaks you could do. So like I said, I ran into turbos on beta that just run my pet down the entire game, and I was trying to cook a little bit, and I said, what if I made my pet super small, right? Did it really help? Probably not too much, but that is an option. If you want your pet to be harder to attack or harder to see, you can get the glyph of evaporation, you can get the glyph of the unbound elemental, and your pet's size and your pet model becomes a little bit smaller, harder to click maybe in the midst of like a huge fight going on in the arena. Does it help? Probably not that much. But with that being said, I actually have ran into an issue where it's not a huge deal on most terrains, but I have noticed on different elevations, my pet actually can't pet freeze. So like this is a small elevation, it probably won't be a big issue. But when I think of like a certain map, maybe like Tiger's Peak on the side pillars, my pet has an issue pressing Pet Nova sometimes, so it probably won't be an issue that you run into too often, but it's something to think about. And then the other cosmetic glyph would be Glyph of Illusion. This is a great glyph. I don't know why they ever removed it. It allows you to change your race in the arena for 2 minutes, and you can become any race. So like right now, I'm obviously playing as an Alliance mage. I'm a Goblin mage right now, so you could be like an Undead mage. It's really cool. I think it probably increases your damage by like at least 10%, maybe 15%. Yeah, it's dope. Awesome glyph. Don't know why they ever removed it. And then moving on to professions, actually, this is a big one. Right now, I'm running tailoring and herbalism. So your first profession is tailoring 100% of the expansion. You never, ever drop it. It's way too valuable. You get a huge proc, a huge cloak proc from it, and you always play it. Your second profession is a little bit more flexible. I'm choosing to run herbalism for the lifeblood on use, and what that does is when you use it, it gives you 3,000 haste for 20 seconds. My thought process on it was that our stats are very, very low at the start of the expansion. Like I said, I only have like 14% haste in full gear. You don't have that much haste, right? And so I thought using this on use and gaining 3,000 haste kind of, made up for that a little bit, and I've been liking it a lot. I messed around with blacksmithing, I messed around with jewel crafting. Enchanting I have not tried, but those are other viable professions you could run. I know some mages do it. I personally just feel like Lifeblood at the beginning of the expansion holds a lot of value, and then I think as the seasons progress and you do gain more and more haste, it starts weaning off a little bit. It's not as great. It starts tapering off a little bit. It's not as good. And then you could swap to something like enchanting. You could go jewel crafting for the larger gems. Those are very viable options. But for the first season, I think Lifeblood is a great option. So that's what I'm doing personally. You could run engineering, but that plays a little bit of a larger role when it comes to like the races you'll play, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Actually, we could do races right now. So you're primarily going to play human on Alliance. It's like the only race that you should be playing, at least. It's just the strongest race in general, I would say. And the reason why is because trinkets and proc trinkets, they just hold a lot of value this expansion. For whatever reason, your on-use trinket, your proc trinket, they just do a lot more in this expansion than others. So you really want to try and have both of those at all times if you can. On Horde, if you do want to play Horde, you could run Undead. I wouldn't really go Troll. I wouldn't play Orc. I would play Undead. And the reason why is because Fear is still pretty OP in MoP. You play against a lot of Warlocks. You play against a decent amount of Priests, but Warriors as well. And even Resto Druids have Fear. When they symbiosis a Warrior, they also gain their own Fear. So a lot of classes can actually fear you this expansion. It's not bad to be an Undead. It's not terrible. If you are going to play Horde, you could play Orc, but I don't think the hardiness ratio is that great. You do gain a little bit of damage from Blood Fury, but I just don't think it's super beneficial. And going back to the profession side of things, if you do play an Undead mage, what a lot of mages did back in the day was they would drop their PvP trinket and just play the double on-use and proc trinket. That's how good these trinkets are, and that's why you should play Alliance. If Undead mages are playing without a PvP trinket and they're using the on-use and the proc trinket, that really just speaks volumes to me that like these trinkets are very, very worth using, right? What you could do is, and this is what I did back in the day, was when I played an Undead mage, you could go engineering. And so what engineering does, the benefit of playing engineering is that it gives you kind of an on-use. I don't believe it's as good as the on-use trinket, but you apply it to your gloves and it's like a budget on-use, you could say, and you still run that PvP trinket with the medallion, and so you kind of make up for it a little bit. And so not only do you have medallion, you have Will of the Forsaken, and then you have your engineering on-use trinket, and then you still have your proc trinket. So that's an option as well. If you were playing Undead, that's the route I would go personally. But if you're really YOLO, you just kind of full send it. You don't really have to wear a medallion. And the reason why mages opt out of using a medallion as opposed to other classes is because we have blink, right? We have ice block. We can get ourselves out of CC more frequently than most classes can, right? So that's why it's okay and you can do it. Not something I mess around with too much personally, but yeah, getting back into it and getting back into the playstyle side of things. There are a few differences. Well, there's a lot of differences going from like retail mage to MoP mage. Going into the playstyle side of things, if you're a retail mage and you're trying to like play MoP mage for the first time, it's definitely different. And I don't want anyone to like play this expansion and get discouraged or anything like that. And that's like a reason why I'm making the video, because like I'm very passionate about MoP mage. It's like when I started becoming good at the game, and I think it's a very, very fun iteration of this class. And with that being said, there are a few differences, a few key takeaways. Alter time being one of them. In retail, alter time is always used as a defensive button, right? You can never use it offensively. I mean, that's not true. You use it to reset your blinks. I guess that counts. That can be offensive. But for the most part, you want to use it to mitigate damage taken and restore the health that you just lost. But in MoP, this is where it becomes like really fun and really interesting in my opinion. So let me show you here. In MoP, the really cool thing about Mage, and I'll show you in my trinket. It doesn't really matter that much, but basically what Alter Time does in MoP is it snapshots not only your health, but it snapshots your buffs and your debuffs, right? So what you really want to try doing in MoP, and this is going back to the trinkets, how I mentioned trinkets were really, really broken in MoP, right? So what you can do is as a mage, and this is why tailoring is also very, very important for a mage in MoP, because you can essentially alter time, not only your Fingers of Frost and your Frost Firebolt procs, you can do it with your proc trinkets, your weapon proc, your tailoring proc, and it double dips. It's very, very, very good. So I'll show you an example of that right here. So I'm gonna proc, you know, all my stuff. I got a Fingers up. I'm trying to get my weapon. I got my weapon proc. Maybe I'll get my trinket proc and my cloak proc. They might be on ICD because I swapped my gear. Usually they proc pretty fast. So now I have all three of my procs, and what you can do is you alter, right? And then you send your ice lances, whatever. That's cool. But then look right here. Look at the duration of my buffs. They refresh. So you can also alter time your procs with your trinket and your cloak and your weapon, and that is very, very good. You're just essentially getting more duration than every other class, and it's a very important aspect of mage and MoP that I feel like a newer mage player, and maybe even, you know, an average mage player wouldn't fully understand, because you don't really think about it too much, but it's very, very good. And then another reason why it's good is because why it's bad. So there's like another aspect to it as well. If you have your procs off of CD and then you alter time and then proc them while you're in the altered time and then you alter back, you will remove your procs. And I will show you an example of that in 30 seconds. And that's terrible, because not only did you just remove insane damage modifiers, but you put them on CD. All of these procs have an ICD. The weapon proc is pretty short, but the trinket and the cloak proc are around a minute. They might be a little bit less, and you know, it's not a great feeling when you alter them off, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. So you really want to try, and before you press alter time, try and have these procs, and you don't have to have all three, but try and like at least have like your trinket proc and your cloak proc if possible, all while maintaining Fingers of Frost and Frost Firebolt procs too. So I'll show you what it looks like right here. So I'm gonna press alter time. I'm gonna try and proc. Okay, so I got all of my procs. I'm gonna alter back, and then I lost all of them. I just lost all my procs, and now they're on CD for a minute. Terrible. It's a terrible feeling, man. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, just because the way alter time works in this expansion is it does snapshot your health, your mana, your buffs, and your debuffs. So in theory, no one really does this, or it doesn't really happen on purpose. But if you were to alter and then block, come out of your ice block, and then apply the hypothermia debuff to yourself, and you alter back, you could, in theory, back-to-back ice block, because it removes that debuff. And that's more so just to kind of preface like the idea of what alter time is in Mists of Pandaria. So it doesn't work in the same way as it does in retail whatsoever. And I feel like this is one of the bigger keys, I guess you could say, to playing mage and MoP if you want to really succeed on the class, is managing your alter times very well. It's not just about your Fingers, it's not just about Frostfire bolts, but it's about, you know, managing your trinkets. With that being said, there are a few cool things, you know, you can do with your alter time too, if it lines up in that way. I don't really focus on it too much, but you know, you can be conscious of it, you can think about it, and if it happens, it happens. So the ice block glyph right here, you essentially can ice block, alter, right? And so you have the 3 seconds of immunity, and when you alter back, you have it again. So with the ice block glyph, it comes in handy for short versus double caster in threes, right? You essentially could have 6 seconds of pure immunity to all damage, all spell interrupts, etc., which it's pretty good in certain scenarios. Something to keep in mind of. Like I said, it doesn't really plan out, or doesn't happen too often, but it can, and it's something to be mindful of if you know, see an opportunity. With that being said, I do want to talk about another aspect of the ice block glyph, which is kind of cool. So like I said, if you're fighting against maybe God Comp, Mage Lock Shaman, LSD, LSD2, these are all very, very popular double caster comps. If you see a window where you think your team is going to win the game, but you're like, ah, man, like it's just so brutal. They have Wind Shear, they have Solar Beam, they have Counterspell, they have Lock Counterspell, they have a lot of ways to stop you from getting a deep sheep, and you think you're one go away from winning, what you can do is you can, you know, get your Fingers of Frost up or whatever, and then, you know, so you're ready to deep the healer, and then you will ice block, deep, and then cast a sheep, and then now you are immune completely to all forms of interrupts. So it's like a cheeky play you can make, something to be mindful of if you think you're about to win the game. Like I said, it's not something that you would do too often, but if you think you're going to win the game and you have all the damage ready, they have no trinkets, they have no more defensives, it is a play that you can make. absolutely, and it's pretty cool when it works out too. Admittedly, it's pretty cool. And the damaging aspect of it, it's pretty straightforward in MoP, honestly. You don't have too much to think about in terms of how you do damage outside of Alter. I would say Alter is like the biggest mechanic in terms of managing your damage well. Outside of that, you're pretty much a Lance bot. You don't, Frostbolt doesn't do too much damage. Icicles don't do too much damage, at least in Season 12. So you're kind of just focusing on managing your Ice Lances, you know, your Fingers of Frost, your Frozen Ice Lances, and things of that nature. The biggest thing I want to talk about outside of Alter though is actually snapshotting your living bombs, because you can do that. So normally you apply living bomb, which is great, and then it ticks, right? 15k, 32k. But what you can do is you can actually Nova them, right? And then you snapshot your living bomb with the Nova when they're frozen, because you gain the shatter effect, which is really cool. So now you see my living bombs are ticking. They're critting rather a lot more than they were before, and that's because when you living bomb a frozen target, they do benefit from shatter, and that does snapshot. And living bomb is your #1 damage in MoP. It's a dot, obviously, so it's not too crazy. It will increase your damage tenfold. So that's like your priority, if you can, is to try and apply living bomb to frozen targets just to get the shatter benefit from it. And then outside of that, man, yeah, like it's the damage is pretty straightforward. I would say those are the two biggest things, you know, Alter and then living bomb. Outside of that, it's pretty self-explanatory. Frozen orb, I guess. Frozen orb. In other expansions, it does no damage at all. You would literally use Frozen Orb just to get fingers procs. But in MoP, Frozen Orb actually does a decent amount of damage to the target that it's hitting. So you can't obviously always control where it goes. It's a lot easier with like a rogue on your team stunning everyone for you. But if you can, try and hit your frozen orbs on the guy that you're attacking, that you're trying to kill, because the damage does add up over time. One thing I didn't touch on was Incanter's Ward. You pretty much want to use this before you burst or on CD almost. You kind of have it up the entire game. I would use this, or I would make sure I have this buff up before I alter as well. It's 15% spell damage. Basically, when you use it, it gives you absorb, it gives you a shield, and then whenever they attack through the shield, you gain 15% spell damage. So it's 15% damage, pretty crazy. And this is a buff, so it also snapshots with your alter time. You know, having this up, right, when you proc everything, I don't have a weak order for it or an add-on, but I'll show you the buff in a second what it looks like. You know, having it up right here, when I click myself, you see it. Well, I don't actually get the buff because I didn't take damage, but yeah, you can alter the buff and you'll do a lot more damage because of it. That's one thing you want to do. Outside of that, man, I don't think there's too much. I don't think there's too much. You know, I think macros and add-ons are pretty preference. I don't have too many crazy macros, man, not at all. I pretty much run the basics. I have a spell steal macro with cancel or a sack, just because in this expansion, you can cancel sack. So you spell steal sack from a paladin, and then you cancel it, you can sheep them. Everything else is pretty basic. You know, I have like my one-shot macro with veins and my on-use, etc. Focus deep freeze, focus polymorph, focus CS, but I would say macros are pretty preference. Add-ons as well, preference. These are the add-ons I use if you want to take a quick look. I try and keep my UI pretty basic when I play classic expansions. You know, I don't want my UI to be like a complete spaceship and all that good stuff, but I would say the only two add-ons that you must have would be some sort of DR tracker, whether it's S Arena or Gladius, and then Omnibar. Outside of that, I think it's purely preference. I do have a add-on to track my procs, just because procs are a huge part, like I mentioned many times in this video. They're a huge part of MoP Mage playstyle, and you want to try and make sure you manage them well. You know, when you're in the midst of a game, you're in a 5-minute battle, you're in a 6-minute battle, it's not always going to line up that way. You know, you're going to be doing offensive goes, you're trying to CC people, and it's just not going to work out that way. But at least being mindful and conscious of it is good, you know? It's important to have in the back of your mind for sure, because if you can line them up, it is absolutely game changing. And your first alter time should always be with every proc up, because when you start a game fresh, you usually will proc everything in the first. If you guys are noticing, when I get in combat, I'm procking everything within the first like 5 seconds, right? So as soon as you get in combat and you start, you know, loading up damage, they're gonna proc instantly. And then outside of that, after that, it becomes a little bit trickier to manage them. But at least for your first alter time, you want to try and have up all 3 of them if you can, and then obviously having 2 fingers in your Frostfire Bolt definitely helps. One little cool play you can make as well, if it so happens to line up that way, is you can alter your palm. So right here, I'll alter, I'll palm, and then I'll sheep, and then maybe they'll trinket, or maybe the sheep will run out, and you alter back, and then you also retain that palm buff, because like I said, everything gets snapshotted with alter when you use it, and you can palm sheep again. And outside of that, man, I don't think there's too much left to it in terms of the gameplay and all of that, and the stats and everything. I will talk about comps, because I think the comps do change later on in the expansion, but this is a tier list for season 12. I think the best comp for Mage specifically, obviously, in season 12 is Warrior, Mage, Mistweaver. I think melee are pretty darn good at the start of the expansion. Like I said, I think casters scale better towards the end, but for the beginning of the expansion, I think melees are pretty dominant. I think this is the best comp you can run. Absolutely. It's going to be Mage, Warrior, Mistweaver. Second one would be Mage, Warrior, Resto Druid. And then this is more of a wild card. No one played it back in OG MoP, but I think it'll be really good. I played it a little bit. I think Mage Windwalker, Resto Druid, and Mage Windwalker Mistweaver actually takes third place. It's crazy to say because like no one's played it before really, but I think it has a lot of value. I think it'll be very strong this season. For the A tier, I have God Comp, of course, RMD, of course. You know, these are staple comps for Mage. Even Mage Lock, Shaman, just staple comps. I think they get a lot better towards the end of the expansion and later on in the seasons, but like especially God Comp. But I think for season 12, I think this is just going to be A tier. I do think Rogue Mage Druid in the best hands possible is the best comp you can play for Mage, no matter what. But I think I'm talking, you know, it's the best Mage, the best Rogue, the best Druid, and then you know, it can be the best comp. But I think, you know, just like your average player, your average gladiator, even your average rank 1 man, it's a hard comp to play. It's pretty tough. Mage Lock Shaman, it's a pretty good comp throughout the entirety of the expansion. I think it does get better like God comp towards the end of the expansion, but yeah, for season 12, I think it'll be an A tier. And then I have RMP in the B tier just because Holy Priest in the season 15 meta, or the last patch of the expansion, which is the patch we're playing on, man, they got nerfed hella hard. I'm not gonna lie, they got nerfed pretty hard. They're not that great, pretty mid healer. I think our Druid outclasses them in every single way, so that's why I have RMP in the B tier rather. And then the C tier, these are just comps that, you know, you can play, you can mess around with them, but I never played them a single time in MoP. I was rank 1 twice in MoP. I didn't play these comps at all. I think they're okay. Like I said, you can do okay, well, you know, you can do all right with them, but they're definitely not in contention to be A and S tier. So this is what I have personally for my tier list. Maybe not everyone will agree with me, but I'm going to be running a lot of this comp at the start of the expansion, a lot. And it's also a pretty easy comp to play if you're, you know, just getting into Mage or you're just getting into MoP Arena. It's pretty straightforward. There's not too much going on with how you set up with these comps. To touch on that lightly, when you play a Mage in each and every one of these comps, your playstyle does change a little bit. It definitely does. The way you play Warrior, Mage, Monk is actually not the same as you play with a Druid. When you play with a Druid, you're going to be more of a setup based comp, whereas with the Monk, you're going to try and just dish out a lot more damage, right? When you play God comp, you're going to be really setup based. When you play Rogue Mage, you're going to be really setup based, and your playstyle definitely changes with each comp that you play. That being said, man, if you guys want to see any videos with me playing a specific comp and, you know, kind of going over the play style of each and every comp individually, you know, I feel like that could be a fun little series that we do too. So let me know in the comments if that's what you guys want to see, and if you guys enjoyed the guide, man. This is my first video I've ever produced, and, you know, I'm just super excited for MoP. So yeah, man, stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you guys have any sort of critique or anything like that, man, I'm all ears. Hope to improve obviously with this. I know I'm not the best, but yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, man, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.